For 15 years, Grace had been a loving wife to her husband, Samuel. She had lived in their little house with hope and dreams of having children to fill it with laughter. But despite all her love, patience, and prayers, Grace remained childless. And as the years passed, the pressure weighed heavily on her heart. The community, with its eyes always on others, couldn't understand. Grace was a good woman, a devoted wife, but in their eyes, she was incomplete. Her mother-in-law, the ever-critical Mrs. Abina, was especially harsh. Every day, she would remind Grace of the one thing she lacked, a child. It was as though Grace had failed her family by not giving birth to a son. "You're nothing but a barren woman," Mrs. Abina would say with disgust, her voice sharp and cruel. "Your husband deserves more than this empty house. You have no use here." Grace, despite her hurt, would always respond with a gentle smile, a quiet strength in her eyes. She knew her worth wasn't determined by the number of children she had, but the words cut deep and the loneliness of childlessness seeped into her soul. As the years went by, Samuel began to feel the weight of his mother's words. He loved Grace, but the pressure to have children, especially a son, grew unbearable. His mother would nag him every day, telling him how much his family was lacking because of Grace's inability to conceive. And one fateful day, Samuel, exhausted and torn, gave in. "Grace," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I think it's time I marry another woman. My mother can't take this anymore. We need a child, a son." Grace felt as though the ground had been ripped from under her. She looked at Samuel, her heart breaking. She had always known that the pressure from his mother was too much, but hearing it from Samuel, the man she loved, was devastating. "Please don't," she whispered, but he was already convinced that this was the only way. And so, Samuel married a second wife. Her name was Iphioma, a young woman full of life and energy. Grace had to watch, with a heavy heart, as the woman moved into her home, taking the place that should have been filled by the child she had prayed for. The new wife, Iphioma, was beautiful, and her youth was a stark contrast to Grace's quiet, subdued demeanor. It wasn't long before Iphioma began to insult Grace, calling her worthless and mocking her inability to bear children. Grace, though broken inside, kept her silence. She never lost her hope in God, even though her faith was tested daily. She knew that her worth wasn't in her ability to bear children, but in the love and kindness she had shown to others. "How does it feel to be the old barren one?" Iphioma would sneer, her eyes gleaming with malice. "The husband you love so much is mine now, and I will give him the child he always wanted." Grace would quietly turn away, leaving the room with tears welling up in her eyes, but she never let the anger consume her. She cooked, cleaned, and served Iphioma just as she had served Samuel. She knew her worth was beyond her ability to have children. She knew that one day everything would be set right, but the insults didn't end with Iphioma. The other women in the village, knowing the struggles Grace faced, couldn't resist gossiping behind her back. They would whisper about Grace's inability to give birth, casting their judgments upon her like stones. At every gathering, at every event, Grace was reminded of her failure. The other women would talk about how they had children and how important it was for a woman to bear children for her husband. They would laugh and exchange knowing glances, as though Grace wasn't even there. Grace never responded. She would sit quietly, always keeping her head down. But inside, she felt her heart break with every laugh, every whispered word. Still, she held on to her faith, clinging to the belief that God had a plan for her, that one day she would be a mother, that one day her worth would be recognized. 2 years passed. Iphioma, who had come into marriage with the promise of bearing Samuel a child, could not conceive. She, too, faced the pressure of the community, and each day that passed without a child, her frustration grew. She began to resent Grace more and more. How could this woman, who had no children, still be in the house, still be part of Samuel's life? Meanwhile, Grace continued to live in quiet dignity. She worked hard, never complaining, and kept her hope alive. She had long since stopped listening to the insults, knowing that nothing they said could take away her worth. Her faith in God was her anchor. And then one morning, After years of longing and prayers, Grace woke up feeling different. She had always known when something was off. She rushed to the doctor, and to her amazement, she was told that she was pregnant, not just with one child, but twins. 2 little boys growing inside her. It was a miracle, and for the first time in years, Grace felt joy that could not be contained. Her heart raced as she rushed home to share the news with Samuel. When he heard it, his face lit up a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Grace, you're really pregnant?" he asked, tears forming in his eyes. "Yes," Grace whispered, her hands gently resting on her growing belly. "Twins, Samuel. God has answered my prayers." But the joy was bittersweet. It came with the knowledge that the woman who had so cruelly mocked her, the woman who had belittled her, was still in the house, still taking up space where Grace had once dreamed of raising children. As Grace's pregnancy progressed, the tension in the house grew. Iphioma, still unable to conceive, watched in anger and jealousy as Grace's belly grew round with life. Every day, Iphioma would taunt Grace, calling her names and accusing her of stealing Samuel's love. "I'll never understand why he chose you over me," Iphioma would hiss, her voice venomous. "You're a burden, a disgrace." Grace ignored her, her heart filled with peace, knowing that these children, were a gift from God. The day finally came when Grace gave birth to 2 beautiful, healthy twin boys. Samuel was overwhelmed with joy, holding his sons in his arms, tears of happiness streaming down his face. But this miracle, this moment of triumph, would be the beginning of the end for Iphioma. The twins' arrival brought a change in the household. Grace was now the mother of the house, and Iphioma, unable to bear any children of her own, was left to face the reality of her situation. Grace's mother-in-law, Mrs. Abina, saw the joy in her son's eyes and the love that surrounded the twins. She had been a harsh woman, one who never understood Grace's worth, but now she saw something different. Her son was happy. He had the children he had longed for, and Grace had given him that gift. For the first time in years, Mrs. Abina approached Grace, her face filled with remorse. "Grace," she said, her voice soft, "I am so sorry. I was wrong. I treated you unfairly. You are a good woman, and I can see now the strength you've always had." Grace looked at her mother-in-law, her eyes filled with forgiveness. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly. "We all make mistakes. I have prayed for peace in this house, and I believe that peace is finally here." But it wasn't just Mrs. Abina who had changed. Iphioma, seeing Grace's strength and the love that Samuel had for her and their sons, realized how wrong she had been. She had come into the house with selfish intentions, but now she saw that Grace's patience, her faith, and her love for Samuel had won out in the end. One afternoon, Iphioma approached Grace. She had no words to say, but her eyes spoke volumes. She nodded her head slowly, as if acknowledging the truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice small. "I was wrong." Grace smiled softly, her heart swelling with the peace she had always longed for. "I forgive you, Iphioma. We are all women. We all face our struggles. But we must always support each other." And so, in that moment, the tension that had plagued the house began to lift. Iphioma, seeing the love between Grace and Samuel, decided to leave the home. She could no longer stay in a place where she was not valued, where her bitterness and jealousy had only caused pain. Grace's life had come full circle. She had endured years of mockery, years of hurt, but now she had her children, her family, and the respect she had always deserved. The day that Iphioma left, Grace stood by the door, watching her go. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the years that followed, Grace raised her twin sons with all the love she had stored in her heart. And as the boys grew, so did her faith. She had endured the hardest of trials, and now she was stronger than ever, a woman who had never lost hope, never lost faith, and had been rewarded beyond measure. And the community, who had once whispered about her, now spoke of her with admiration. They saw the strength in her, the strength of a woman who had been tested, but never broken. Grace had become a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of faith and patience. And in her sons, she saw not just the answer to her prayers, but the love that would last a lifetime. The years passed, and Grace's twin boys, Samuel Jr. and David, grew up under the loving care of their mother. They brought joy and laughter to the household, filling every corner with the sound of their innocent chatter and playful laughter. Grace, now a proud mother, knew that every tear she had shed, every moment of suffering, had been part of her journey to this beautiful moment. She had endured the mocking, the insults, and the rejection, but in the end, her faith in God had led her to this day, surrounded by love, with 2 children who called her mother. Samuel, her husband, who had once been torn between his loyalty to his mother and his wife, now stood by her side, deeply grateful for the strength and grace she had shown throughout their trials. He often marveled at how Grace had never let the bitterness of the world change her kind heart. The love between them grew stronger each day, and the bond they shared with their children was unbreakable. As Grace watched her sons play, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. Her heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that God had a plan for her all along. The pain of those early years, when she felt abandoned and unloved, had transformed her into the woman she was today, a woman who had endured and risen stronger, who had proven that no matter how hard life may seem, perseverance and faith would always lead to victory. One quiet evening, as the family gathered together for dinner, Samuel Jr. and David sat at the table, laughing as they shared a joke that only they understood. Grace smiled as she looked at her family, her heart full. It wasn't the wealth, the titles, or the accolades that mattered to her. It was this simple, beautiful life filled with love, faith, and the joy of her children. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Abina, came to visit that evening, her face now softened with years of reflection. She had come to see how much Grace had changed their lives. No longer was she the critical, judgmental woman who once tore Grace down. The older woman's heart had shifted, and she could now see Grace's value. Not just as a wife, but as a mother, a woman of incredible strength and grace. Mrs. Abina, who had once been so harsh, now smiled warmly at her daughter-in-law. "Grace," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion, "I want to thank you. I see now that I was wrong, and I'm so proud of you. You've shown me that strength isn't just about bearing children, but about bearing the weight of life's challenges with grace." Grace smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mama. I know you did what you thought was best for your son, but sometimes life teaches us lessons we can't learn until we face them ourselves." Mrs. Abina nodded, her heart full of regret for the years of harsh words she had said, but grateful for the opportunity to finally see the truth. And so, Grace's life came full circle. She had been mocked, rejected, and misunderstood, but now she stood as a symbol of resilience, strength, and unwavering faith. The family that once struggled to find peace was now united, and Grace, with her heart full of love, knew that everything she had endured was worth it. The community, too, had changed their view of Grace. They no longer whispered behind her back, but instead admired her for her strength and unwavering hope. She had become a role model, a woman who had not only survived the trials of life, but had emerged victorious, with a heart full of love and compassion. And just like that, Grace's story came to an end. Her journey from being mocked and ridiculed to becoming a beacon of hope and strength showed everyone that no matter how difficult life may be, there is always a way forward, a way to rise above it. Grace's faith and her love for her family had carried her through the darkest times, and now she stood at the light with everything she had ever wanted: love, peace, and children who adored her. If you were touched by Grace's journey, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Comment below and let us know your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story that will touch your heart and lift your spirit. Thank you for watching.